Hello and welcome to Compliance Culture, the podcast where we explore what it really takes to embed compliance in practice, not just on paper. I'm Lucinda Carney, CEO of Actus, and each episode will be unpacking how organisations can move beyond tick box compliance to build a culture of genuine accountability, trust, and ethical behaviour. We'll be joined by experts and leaders who are making compliance meaningful, from consumer duty and SMCR to training, performance and leadership. So if you're looking to bridge the gap between rules and real-world behaviour, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's Compliance Culture. And this week we're going to focus in on complaints handling. I'm delighted that Linda Catterall from Create Solutions is joining me, and she's going to take us through the impact of consumer duty in relation to complaints handling particularly, because we know that's a really relevant focus for many people. So first of all though, Linda, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Linda Catterall. I am a consultant with Create Solutions. I've been working with them for a little while now, doing subjects like this, so a lot of online training and things like that, and I really enjoy talking about topics like this. It's really important. So,
you're well versed in all aspects of compliance yourself, aren't you? And you've been involved in implementing consumer duty and complaints handling yourself as well, haven't you, as a professional in-house and as a consultant?
Absolutely, yeah. I've had both hats on.
Yes, you felt the pain. So on that note, in the industry, and if we focus maybe in on consumer duty, but obviously broaden it out as well, because this is about broader compliance too. We know the consumer duty has been around for a couple of years, and complaints handling is obviously a key metric for people to see whether they can evidence good customer outcomes. So have you seen that happening, and what's actually happening in the industry in relation to complaint handling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the consumer duties completely reshaped the way people approach their complaints handling. It's made people sit up and listen and think this is going to be a good source of MI that we've got. Not only MI, sorry, but a good source of testing the water with the clients, whether they're happy, etc. What consumer duty's actually done is brought in a higher standard of conduct. So the focus is very much on businesses to give good outcomes for customers. And that's not just in buying a piece of business, it is all the way through the customer journey. Particularly with vulnerable customers, beg your pardon, a massive focus on that in that area. I've seen firms definitely take up that mantle.
I'm interested. A lot said about vulnerable customers, and I suppose one of the things I wonder about just is the degree to which they would complain. Would they always be? Because I can imagine that sometimes it's the more assertive people that might complain. It's not, is that something that people have to focus in on in a certain way?
Yeah, I think the challenges that firms have had is not necessarily will they complain, but more so how do they pocket their customers? How do they monitor the different types of customer that are complaining, be that vulnerable or be that any other pocket that you might want to put your customers in? And that's what businesses have really struggled with, actually, is getting that MI out of their broken systems or any data that they've got coming through. There's been some really good examples of it. I've seen some firms where, well, actually, if we take that back to the beginning, I know this session isn't about vulnerable customers, but it's very, very much a part of what we're going to be talking about today. But I've seen some really good examples of firms where they have defined what a vulnerable customer is. And I think that's got to be the first starting point here, because a lot of firms struggle with that part of it.
And then, so if they define what they are, do they the complaints handling in relation to that sort of demographic? Is that how they're defined? I appreciate we're going to vulnerable customers here. Is that how you define them there?
Yeah. So what firms are actually doing is taking their vulnerable customer data, which a lot of firms that I've seen, when they start to look at this, they've got low numbers. Now, if you look at the FCA outputs and what the regulator is saying, they should have higher numbers than what they've got. So that's the first bit. They're then looking at the complaints data and the complaints MI, saying, well, actually, are we getting the relevant amount of complaints from our vulnerable customers? Or, like you say, is it other pockets of customers? Is it those people that are classed as in an age bracket, for example, could be one bucket that you're looking at, or it could be that you might class them as professionals if it's limited companies and things like that. So they're sort of looking at that data, but we are at the beginning of that, because historically, particularly in the GI sphere, what we're very good at is relationship building with customers and looking after customers. What we've not historically been very good at is building up the data and having that MI at our fingertips, and that's the lacking bit. So as this builds and as people get more used to talking about these subjects and looking at the complaints data, then they'll be able to build a better picture and hopefully offer not a better service, because I think a lot of the time, people are offering a really good service, but be able to tailor their systems, controls, the way they deal with people, their staff training, etc., all around the complaints data, because it's just a massive vital source of insight into your customer base.
So as someone who's not directly involved in this, so what I'm hearing is then that the consumer duty has turned maybe complaints into from being a necessary evil into being quite a useful source of data, but maybe they haven't got the history in terms of breaking it down and understanding the root of it. So it may, I'm imagining it's all in a bucket, and now what they're doing is slicing it into different areas. Absolutely. And slice it, you can see why the complaint is happening, and then you can solve it. Would that be?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's always been a requirement to do root cause analysis on your complaints, but I think historically what I've certainly seen is people doing it at quite a high level. So if we look at the data that the regulator asks for you on complaints, it's been very high level. It's not very relevant anymore in today's. They've not been looked at. The categories certainly haven't been looked at for a good 10 years, even longer. So what the regulator is doing at the moment is consulting on the reporting of complaints is going to change. So it's going to be a lot more detailed, and it's going to be a lot more consumer duty focused.
Do you know what that's going to be? I was going to say, because I'm not familiar with it. So how is it currently, and what do you see it having to happen going forwards?
So currently at the moment, your complaints data, when you're doing your regulatory returns every 6 months, I think there's 5 or 6, should know this off the top of my head, categories of complaint types. And what the regulator is doing is they're going to change the date that you put the data in. So everybody will do it all at the same time, because the regulator isn't getting meaningful data themselves. So they're getting everybody, your regulatory returns are based on your year end. So it's different times of the year, and the detail is very high level. So that will change. Everybody will do it at the same point in the year. So they get one big wave of information, and the categories, etc., are going to be broken down to a lot more detail with a lot more focus on your customer and your outcomes based.
So it'll be more granular. So we'll report on it in a more granular fashion.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when's that coming in? Do we know?
It is towards the end of this. The new returns will be as of next year, as of 2026. So consultation is out there at the moment. You can find detail about it on the regulator's website as well.
And in terms of getting ready to that, in terms of I'm a firm in this sort of situation, I've been dealing high level, and maybe I haven't really got into my complaints handling yet, and I'm aware this is something that I need to improve. What would you recommend? How would you recommend we start?
Good question. I would say you definitely need to look at the data that you're getting out of your broken systems, or however you manage your business day to day, and see what's there. I would then try and drill into it in a lot more detail. So looking at your categories of customer, your products, your channels of communication. Have you looked at your digital journey, for example, if that's part and parcel of what you do? Is your staff training up to date? Are you just sitting them in front of an e-learning module every year, or are you doing, some real live cases, sharing data back with the staff so they know and they're empowered and they know what decisions they can make and who to refer to, etc. And I would lay that out on I'm not a literal paper person, but put that process into a brown paper, big long, write it all down, see what you've got, and just see where your gaps are, and absolutely go from there, because you will definitely find gaps, I would have thought, if you've not gone through this process already.
So do that bit of analysis, and that will get you in a good position for when you've got to provide that greater data, I suppose, in terms of then putting in sort of improvements. And I assume where you focus first, if you've not done it before and you've got lots of areas where there's gaps, you're going to have to prioritize. And I'm going to assume that anyone that vulnerable would be a top priority, because that's where the emphasis is. If you've covered that one, where would you go next in terms of priority, or does it depend on how big the problem is? I'm answering my own question there. Have you got any recommendations as where you go next in terms of gap analysis?
Your client category is going to be your first point of call, I would have thought. And after that, definitely products. Are your products performing as they should be? Are people getting what they think they're buying? That would definitely be my my next spot to look at.
So yes, it's about integrity and sort of offering what you're doing, and I suppose that's brand and
shop window, isn't it? I think, and people forget sort of social media as well, where complaints are concerned. Are you monitoring your social media channels for signs of disgruntlement, of people being unhappy? A lot of firms forget that element to it. So your LinkedIn profiles, Facebooks, your Trustpilot, or whatever reviews it may be, making sure that somebody's got a good eye on that, because that is definitely your shop window. Everybody can see it's really out there, and it can go viral very quickly, as we've seen.
That's a really valuable one, actually, thinking about it even broader than financial services, because that's where people are often very honest, or certainly they don't bother telling you, but they tell everybody else. I remember 20 years ago doing complaints customer service training, and there was a quote that they said that a happy customer tells 3 people and a disgruntled customer tells about 23 people, and with Absolutely. Social media that can be even worse, can't it? So you do need to keep an eye on it, see what's really going on with things, and respond there.
Definitely.
And I suppose so the consequences of customer not responding well to something like that from a general brand point of view outside of financial services can be really damaging. But I imagine it's the consequences are at least as bad with financial services in the light of consumer duty. What are the issues, or what are the consequences if people are just not dealing with their complaints properly?
It's so far-reaching. So you've got your regulatory problems if you're not handling it properly. There's been some really big fines in the past for firms not handling complaints properly, even before consumer duties come in. I mean, just a quick Google search will show some of the really scary things that have happened, massive fines. But then you've also got the day-to-day things. So staff morale. If things are just constantly going wrong, people aren't putting things right, the staff are just hitting the same brick wall. It's a sort of a computer says no type of situation, and they've got no empowerment. So you've then got that issue as well.
Yes. And I can see, because it's really demoralizing for people if you're constantly having the same issue, if you don't feel the issues are actually getting resolved.
When it's time to report to the board, clarity is everything. But all too often, key information is scattered amongst spreadsheets, emails, and disparate systems. With Actus oversight, governance becomes effortless. Your key consumer duty metrics, status, and outcomes are visualized in real-time dashboards, ready to share at the click of a button. Evidence accountability and progress without the admin headache. So when your board asks for proof, you already have it.
So we've talked a bit about, you might do your gap analysis, you get your root cause, you try and solve, you look to solve your complaints, certainly, and you want to do it well to avoid fines from the FCA, you want to do it well from a staff point of view, and I imagine also brand. We talked about brand and social media, and people check sites, don't they, to go and see whether they want to buy from. If I was going to go on, compare a different insurance product online, then I might well look at the Trustpilot reviews or whatever the reviews are. So those will have an impact too, won't they? Especially if people have complained on the sort of review as opposed directly to you. In terms of since Consumer Duty, are people handling them better? Are you seeing a sort of people jumping? You said some people ignore the social media, overlook it, but what are people doing in terms of handling complaint processes better, and what are the sort of improvements they can do?
I think, again, what I've seen, if I take myself 10 years ago, for example, or even 5 years ago, a lot of firms, when they got complaints, it was a real process that they went through. So it was very, we've had a complaint. Are we right? Are we wrong? Let's answer that question and move on with our lives. I remember doing a session with a firm down south, and I won't name them, but a big insurer, as soon as they got a complaint in, their automatic response was, the first thing they did was send a Fortnum & Mason hamper out to the client. Obviously, it's quite a high-end product that they were selling.
You have to tell me off camera, I'll go and put a complaint in.
So I thought, and at first I thought that's not the right thing to do, because you're not actually looking into what's gone wrong with the customer. So I sort of probed this with them a little bit, and actually it didn't matter what had happened. Because the client had a cause to complain, they got this hamper, and then they'd go on and do their investigation. So, and I've seen firms where they've had complaints process in the past where they get a complaint in and the automatic response is to write and say sorry and send the client, I don't know, a nominal amount of money. So I think that attitude towards it has completely gone, and people are thinking more outside the box, where it's not always about, if you have done something wrong, it's not always about sending the money to say sorry. People are starting to think outside the box in terms of sending flowers, or a letter from the MD, or whatever it is. It's not always necessarily about a financial gain from the customer. It's about that wider picture.
So anyway, thinking as a consumer, obviously it's nice to have a hamper of something, but it kind of misses the point, doesn't it? If you feel that something has been, you've been missold or whatever, it depending on how big the issue is, actually you want them to, other people not to have the same problem you've had. But if that's how I feel, if I was actually complaining, then you'd want to make sure that they fixed it, and that's actually what you want to hear. And it's interesting as well, I'm not thinking so much financial services, just I'm thinking supermarkets or things where I might have just said, they've got something wrong. You want to hear that they've actually heard your complaint and understood it, as opposed to really generic language back where go, oh, we'll look at our processes type stuff, have a 10 quid voucher. You really want to believe that they have heard it and are going to fix things. So there's something about, in my view, is making sure that you're communicating back to the customer in a sincere, authentic way about their complaint, personalized. I don't that's what I would want.
So there's definitely, the regulator is going to hone in on that, because with this, the new reporting, it's like you say, it's getting granular was the term that you used earlier, definitely going to be the case, and they are going to be able to tell whether you're putting things right. I mean, sometimes things go wrong, it can't be helped. When you've got humans involved, even when you haven't, things will always go wrong, but the regulator is going to be able to see if you are taking that into account and you are trying to fix things. They will be able to see that now moving forward from the new reporting.
It's going to change in terms of the new reporting and the granularity of it.
Yeah, so where your training for your staff is concerned, that's what I was going to go on to. So it's not just a case of this is our complaints process, crack on and deal with them for us. There is a lot more soft skills around it, and also if you're in a firm that's got a high number of complaints, it's quite a negative job to do, isn't it? So making sure that there's well-being for staff there as well, because it can be quite pressuring. People start taking things home, particularly if it's, if you take in terms of something like travel insurance, for example, if you've got a complaint handler and you've got someone stuck in a Spanish hospital, they're not covered and they're having to try and deal with this, you need to make sure your staff are okay as well, because that does affect you as a person, doesn't it? Things like that, you start taking it home. So we've definitely seen an uptake in people providing quite a lot of well-being for their staff as well.
Yes, I can see that, where the stakes are quite high. If you're finally not covered on something that you thought you were genuinely, and your empathy is there, that could be quite distressing. Actually, I don't know whether you'll know the answer to this, but I'm just going to ask out of curiosity, when you've been doing stuff on the training, what's the normal percentage of complaints? Does it depend from industry to industry, or what? If I was looking at my outcomes, for argument's sake, and I suppose, and again, I'm going to answer my own question, I'd need to benchmark my own complaint level. But is there kind of an industry standard?
The regulator does have a take on this, and I'm hoping I'm going to get this quote right now, but I believe it's something like 1% of your customer base. They would expect that to be the number of complaints that you get. If you've got 100 customers, they'd expect to see 1% of that making a complaint.
So less than that would be abnormal. Almost.
Yes, but less than that is very, very common. So people don't record a lot of historically, from what I've seen, there aren't a lot of complaints. Now, I don't know whether it's because they're not captured properly, or whether it's because, as a human, again, if I'm sat and my job is to sell insurance and I've got people complaining, I don't want to stick my hand up and say I've done something wrong or there's a complaint about me. So there's a bit of a culture change there, I suppose, for firms to get across, because capturing the data, unless you're sat there listening to every phone call, got oversight of every customer interaction, you're waiting for other people to give you that data back, and if they're not, then you're not capturing the right amount of complaints, and historically people don't. So hopefully the new reporting will drive that more.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because obviously the topic of this is compliance culture, and Brits, generally it's Brits, it's consumer duty, it's an English or a British requirement, but actually we don't tend to like to complain very much, do we? But that doesn't mean we're satisfied. And I think that there's a difference between complaining and wanting to continuously improve. So as an industry, as an organisation, we should be wanting to improve our customer service. So that's not necessarily about, when people complain, they're really fed up. Whereas maybe it's about identifying the people who go, it was all right, but I wouldn't go again, sort of thing. And a bit like net promoter type thing.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether that's something to look into more.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a change in the way people approach things like that. So again, the training of the staff. So it's not just about waiting for someone to say, I want to complain. It's picking up on those unsaid things. So it could be tone of voice, it could be those little words that people say, or the interaction that you're having with the client. But we've also seen some firms that have introduced, and I don't know how people feel about this, but they've introduced AI within their call recording. So what that's done is they've obviously set the parameters, but it will pick up on tone of voice, one of them being, but certain words as well. So where they're able to pick up where the human might not pick up that the person is trying to complain, the AI software might point them towards that call for someone else to listen to it, and they're capturing more that way. And it does capture more because, again, the human element of it might not necessarily pick it up for whatever reason, be it training or.
Yeah, and also you don't really want to hear it, to be honest. We don't really want to hear someone's complaining. It feels personal. It's a bit like rejection.
Absolutely.
So whereas if the AI is going, oh, actually those words, those were trigger words and we could have done better. And I think there is this whole thing, it's got to feel safe, like you're talking about the training. It's got to feel safe to learn, to improve. The culture needs to be, they weren't really complaining, but we could do that better. Right.
Yeah.
So if we want to improve our customer service from 80% to 90%, then we need to hear those words and be proactive in doing a better job there.
And that comes from the top, that comes from the board of directors down. They've got to want to hear it themselves as well.
Yeah. How does it link to, because I was thinking again, I'm thinking one of our bank, I don't know if they still do it. They used to, at the end of, if you'd phoned them at the end of a call, sort of say, is there anything else I can help you with? Type of thing. I know this isn't complaining, but it's kind of checking you're happy. And there was something about the activity for me of going, no, thank you very much. That's everything. It kind of closed it down and showed that they'd done everything that you needed. Whereas as opposed to waiting for us to do it. And I don't know, is there more of a culture of that kind of checking in piece?
So I've certainly heard it when I've spoken to the bank, etc. That feels really common to me. Do we do it in the general insurance industry? Probably not. Should we? Absolutely, yeah. I think that's just good customer service, isn't it?
Yes, and which basically this is what we're talking about, isn't it? Good customer service prevents the complaints, hopefully, or gets you're completely closing those down and giving people the opportunity to tell you stuff as well. Yeah. Same thing when you get surveys after, or again, you don't always do them, but that sort of thing, giving you the opportunity to provide that feedback.
Yeah.
Being open to feedback, really, that's the interesting thing, that not everybody.
And I think that's a nub of it. I think a lot of people aren't certainly open to negative feedback. Like you say, it's human nature, isn't it? You get defensive even though it's not necessarily about you. You do get defensive on the end of the phone, and that's a cultural piece that people need to work on, definitely.
Fascinating. Well, I think we're starting to stray. It's very easy to stray away from complaints, isn't it, Linda? So we've gone a little bit onto vulnerable and into also the feedback, which also is highly relevant. Are there any final tips that you'd say to people getting ready for next year, or just to summarise? If someone's thinking, right, I really want to get to grips with complaints in my firm. Any final tips you'd say?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say definitely consider any third parties that you deal with, or if you've got any outsourced arrangements. That's a mine of information and something that you definitely should be looking at. A review of your communications, your customer communications. It's a big part of consumer duty, customer understanding, and I think that's a big part of where a lot of complaints come from. I think we mentioned at the beginning, somebody thinks they're covered for something and they're not. So definitely look at your communications, your training. So not just around your processes, but the soft skills and the cultural piece, and obviously look at the well-being that you are providing for the complaint staff as well. Really drill down into your MI. So it's a brilliant source of information, and make sure you know what it's telling you. The regulator is going to be asking for a lot more detail, so have a look at that and make sure you are able to granularly explain where your complaints are coming from and what you're doing with it. Make sure your board has bought into, or your senior management team has bought into any work that you're doing around complaints and have got a good understanding of what's coming into the business. They're the ones that are going to have to answer any questions should they be probed by the regulator as well. So they need to have a good handle on what's going on. And then finally, it sounds really basic, but just make sure that all your staff understand what the definition of a complaint is, not just what the regulator says a complaint is. I imagine a lot of them can start the expression of dissatisfaction, but what does that mean to your firm? Making sure that your staff can actually articulate that if they need to would be my tips.
Excellent top tips there, Linda. Thank you so much for joining me today. I was going to say, if people want to get in touch with you, they can get in touch with you via Create Solutions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Amazing. And I know you do training on this as well. So if people want to do training on on complaint handling, etc., then that's something you specialise in.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me today on compliance culture. I hope you found our discussion was practical and insightful and helps us to see how we can all play a part in embedding genuine values-led compliance. If you'd like to know more about how Actus software can support organisations with performance accountability, consumer duty and SMCR compliance, why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk? The links are in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and share the podcast, and join me next time as we continue to explore what real compliance culture looks like in action.
When it's time to report to the board, clarity is everything. But all too often, key information is scattered amongst spreadsheets, emails and disparate systems. With Actus oversight, governance becomes effortless. Your key consumer duty metrics, status and outcomes are visualized in real-time dashboards, ready to share at the click of a button. Evidence accountability and progress without the admin headache. So when your board asks for proof, you already have it.
Why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk?